It is just a huge honor for me today to be podcast interviewing Danielle McKinley. She's a director over at it almost sounds like a word like PCIHIPAA, but it's PCIHIPAA. The PCI is for payment card industry, and HIPAA is for the Health Insurance Portability and Accountability Act. And she's she's known all throughout the internet as the founder. She's the HIPAA Chick. And she's the co-founder of I Survived a Bench. She's a certified HIPAA advisor with 10 years of experience in risk management, focusing on HIPAA, Health Insurance Portability and Accountability Act, PCI, payment card industry, OSHA, Occupational Safe and Healthy Administration, and Cyber Security. And I always want to say out those acronyms because 80% of our viewers are probably on the other side of the earth. Remember, the Western Hemisphere only has 1 billion people. The Eastern Hemisphere has the other 7 billion people, and our biggest listeners are in Asia and China, India and China. She is the founder of the HIPAA Chick and one of the founding members of, is there a word for that? PCIHI? Is it like PCIHIPAA or?
It's PCIHIPAA.
PCIHIPAA. I kind of like PCIHIPAA. Danielle has a passion for removing barriers like HIPAA compliance for dentists so they can focus on patients without putting their business at risk. She has worked in risk mitigation for 10 years, consulted in thousands of practices, and she can help you spend more time treating patients, enjoying hobbies, and spending time with family and friends by simplifying HIPAA and OSHA compliance for your business. Her passion is helping doctors and business associates understand how to get compliant to protect themselves from a compliance incident with minimal time and resources. If you are a private practice owner, operator, dentist, or an office manager, or a business associate, you can contact her and get a free 30-minute consultation. If you say Dental Town, can I just say that?
Sure, absolutely.
Oh my God. I didn't even ask permission. I just figured the HIPAA Chick would let me do it. So for international viewers, can you just basically explain what HIPAA and OSHA are and why the dentists in America's only got 4.5% of the population. We got 211,000 of the 2 million dentists around the world. So 90% of the world doesn't have to deal with HIPAA or OSHA. But how would you explain HIPAA and OSHA to our Asian African friends?
Yeah, well, first of all, congratulations, because it's a complicated matter. So you're lucky to not have to deal with it. Simply put, HIPAA is about protecting patient data, not just their health history, but also their identity information, which everywhere is struggling globally with identity theft. So it is really there to protect not just the health history, but also the identity information of any of the patients. And then OSHA, simply put, is about protecting the overall health and safety of the physical practice or the on-site facility.
Nice. I just posted a study yesterday on really interesting study about the longevity of dentists. There's some really neat studies. I mean, when I was in dental school, I graduated in 87, we used to, mortality rate among dentists, Science Direct. But when we used to do our castings, we would wrap it in pure white asbestos, pour up put the wax crown in there, pour it up, then burn it out. And when you would take it out, the white asbestos was glowing red as you're looking at, and then you would quench it and all that smoke. And but anyways, mortality rate among dentists in Taiwan from 85 to 2009, and the results said, compared with the general population, dentists in Taiwan consistently demonstrated reduced from all-cause mortality. However, compared with internists, significant and excess mortality were observed in dentists for overall mortality. Drowning, heart disease, all kinds of things. Taiwanese dentists demonstrated significant elevated SMRs for overall causes of drowning and heart disease. Careful precaution should be taken to reduce these trends. Future studies are needed. But yeah, I mean, there's already in Dental Town, I mean, several dentists have died scuba diving, skiing, swimming. So OSHA is for health and HIPAA is for privacy. And the internet is my gosh, there's a lot of characters out there on the internet. I mean, hacking, cybersecurity. I don't even trust Bitcoin. In fact, that was going to be my first question for someone like you. Do you trust Bitcoin?
No. No, I don't trust Bitcoin simply because it's untraceable, right? So it's I think that it's interesting. I'm excited to see where the industry goes on it, but just being in the space that I'm in, I guess you would consider me risk adverse just because of all the things that I see. So from what I've seen from it and how it's used specifically around ransomware attacks, for instance, I don't trust it.
You know, you said it so succinct. I mean, I have always said for years that when you study 5,000 years of recorded history, the only two lessons, I mean, you just walk away with a few lessons. Number one, I don't see any period where government was the good guy. They're always the bad guy. And the two ways that every smart genius ever figured out how to deal with anything was make the governments be transparent and make them checks and balance. In business, we call it competition. Those are the two fundamental things. If you don't know what they're doing, and absolute power corrupts absolutely, it's going to be horrible. And you just nailed Bitcoin in one word: transparency. There isn't any transparency. Then you look at all these government agencies that study crime, not just ours, but around the world, and they're linking Bitcoin money to everything bad you can think of.
Yep. Yeah. And I mean, predominantly in my space, I see it with cyber attacks and ransomware. The cyber criminals want to be paid via Bitcoin because of that lack of transparency. It's much harder to trace it back to who the criminal was.
Yeah, when my son got his ransomware deal and they wanted money and he had all this stuff on the deal, I happily walked it out to the trash can. And we hit it with a sledgehammer a couple of times, kind of like that scene in Office Space where they took the printer out. And I said, no, we're not giving them a dime. We're not going to, I mean, you know, it's crazy. But so, you know, what is something, a lot of dentists are sitting there saying, oh, Howard, I love it when you talk about a guy doing implants or root canals, but dentists, they're kind of like a chef. They want to stay in the kitchen and cook, and they want to hear new recipes. They don't want to find out that their restaurant has to do some government thing. So what is something our listeners could do today that would help them towards achieving compliance? Do you think, what percent of the listeners today do you think aren't compliant or have an issue? Or how important of a subject is this?
Yeah. So, I mean, for one, okay. So your first question, what's something they could do today? One word, simple: outsource. You don't want to be dealing with compliance, right? You want to be spending time with patients and enjoying the clinical side that speaks to you and is your passion, and then ultimately enjoying your personal life, right? So in terms of practices who aren't compliant or how many people have exposures, many. And the most practices do. And the reason being is that HIPAA and OSHA are moving targets. It's not set it and forget it. You don't have to worry about it again, which is why I say outsource, because it's not something that you want to deal with ultimately. And I compare compliance a lot to taxes, because you and I weren't taught how to file our taxes in school. And when we started working, we had to figure out how to accomplish that. And HIPAA and OSHA are very similar for dentists because they aren't taught that in dental school, but when they go into private practice, it comes with the gig. So it's no one's fault that so many practices aren't compliant. It's just a matter of you don't know what you don't know. And Health and Human Services hasn't made it simple to understand, all right, here's the 10 things that need to happen to protect yourself from the penalties.
I'm still blown away. I love it. You're so succinct. I mean, what's one thing they could do? One word: outsource. Why do you not like Bitcoin? One word: transparency. I mean, you're instead of calling you the HIPAA Chick, I'm going to start calling you the succinct chick. The succinct
All right, I'll take it.
HIPAA Chick.
The HIPAA Chick was given to me through, making HIPAA fun. Because like you said, this isn't, the most exciting topic. I'm not a chef. I'm not giving them a new recipe or a new way to do a root canal. So I love it. I'll take it. I love nicknames.
Yeah. So what are three signs a practice may not need help with HIPAA?
May not need help with HIPAA. I would reframe it and
Or
phrase
say
it as like, yeah, three signs that they need it. Number one would be, so it's a new year. Every year a practice is required to take a risk assessment. So if you don't have a risk assessment with a 26-page report outlining, the overall compliance status of your practice, that's something that's causing a gap or vulnerability for your office. The second one would be training. So staff training, there's a big misconception in the industry that, especially with the pandemic, everyone was attending, webinar CEs, and before that going to conferences, and thinking that attending a CE course fulfilled the annual training requirement for their staff. And it doesn't. So you want to maybe evaluate what you're doing for training. You have to have it done annually, and you need to be able to train a new team member in real time upon them being hired. And what you want to look for is you have to prove your training material, you have to prove accountability through testing, and then there's 2 specific acknowledgement forms your team should be signing. So if you're without those 3 things, that's something, again, causing some vulnerabilities. And then the third thing I would say is insurance, cyber and data breach insurance. So at the end of the day, you can be compliant, but it doesn't make you bulletproof, because you'll never be able to control human error or cyber criminals like we were talking about. So making sure you have an understanding of, do I have cyber and data breach insurance? I see a lot of times doctors assuming that that's something that comes with their general liability or their malpractice coverage, and it 100% of the time does not. If you have it, you're paying extra. And it's really important to understand the coverage, because we know that insurance companies do not like to pay. So getting an understanding of that will really help protect you.
So let me succinctly say that. So be the succinct HIPAA chick again. You don't have a HIPAA manual. That was one. Would you
risk
say
assessment? Risk assessment with a report.
Don't have a risk assessment HIPAA manual with report, or no HIPAA?
No. So you need a manual and a risk assessment are 2 different things. Both things that you need. So the top 3 that I gave would be a risk assessment and your 26-page report, staff training, a formal training solution, and data and cyber security insurance.
Data and cyber security. Yeah, it's only going to get worse, because there's so much to gain. I mean, there's 8 billion people, and Russia. I couldn't believe it when Putin said at one of his speeches a couple weeks ago that Russia, the country of Russia, that I grew up in the Cold War, where you don't know this, but when I was in Blessed Sacrament School, I was born in '62, we used to have bomb drills where we crawl under our desk. And even by the 6th grade, we were asking, well, what the hell's being under our desk going to do when a nuclear bomb goes off? And the nuns would just say, just do it. And but now that country, Russia, says they can't compete with Elon Musk. I mean, and they have this like $30 billion 5-year plan to do all this stuff. And all the experts are saying, dude, it's going to be extinct by the time you're done. And you're just going to throw away $30 billion. And so it just takes an individual, and anywhere, probably, I bet 1/3 of those cyber attack ransomware guys at least are in the United States, even though we only have 4% of the population. But it just takes one guy to find some loophole. And my God, they can really do a lot of damage. So where do you buy data and what do you say? Data and cyber?
Yeah, cyber and data breach insurance.
And like, who sells that, and like, what kind of price tag is that?
Yeah, so there's a couple of ways to get the coverage. Some general liability and malpractice providers that listeners may already be working with have the ability to add a rider or purchase a standalone policy. The challenge with buying like a third-party coverage is that you run the risk of a claim being denied if you're not compliant, if you don't follow the breach notification laws properly or the timelines. So we also offer coverage through our Office Safe program. And what makes it really different is that it's coupled with a response team, and we're getting you compliant beforehand. So you're eliminating the risk factor of a claim being denied because you're not meeting all of the compliance requirements. So there's 2 ways: direct. The pro there is easy to get. Con's going to be it's expensive and you don't have a team of responders. Coupling it with a compliance package, you are addressing many needs, and you have more peace of mind with the protection and actually paying out when something happens.
Yeah, the cyber thing is going to get worse and worse and worse. And I'll turn 59 this year, and through some miracle, I live long enough. I think I'll only have to live maybe even 10 or definitely within 20 to witness the internet being shut down for a day or two. I mean, I think someone can break the internet. Do you think that's a possibility, or is that too sci-fi for your
I mean, I think
knowledge?
anything's a possibility, right? The fact of the matter is that cyber criminals are 1,000 steps ahead of us, which is why you're not going to be able to be ahead of the game there. They're always evolving. And I mean, I just watched a 60 Minutes episode too, with like outsourcing our like the 23andMe and issuing our DNA, and how people want access to that. And like you look at the SolarWinds breach, and anyone can be breached. So I don't think it's too far-fetched what you're saying at all. I could see it happening as well.
And it'll be very, very weird day. I never forget this patient who well, I've seen it all the time, but this patient someone broke into her house and they just stole some random things. But they got in her clothing drawers, you know, and where she had that her pants and underwear and stuff like that. And that just so violated her mind. She could not go back to their house, and the husband couldn't talk her out of it. They had to sell the damn house, which was a custom house they built. And same thing, dentists do it every time they find out their receptionist embezzling. First of all, I'm proud of them. The fact that, you know, I just saw one the other day. It was for $700,000. It's like, dude, if you owned a Circle K, no one could steal $700,000. I mean, I'm just proud that you had so much cash flow that you didn't even miss $700,000. That is amazing. But they're completely emotionally wrecked because she was an employee for 10 or 20 years. She was a godmother of their baptism and this and that. And it's just so emotionally violating. I think when you get fined by HIPAA, OSHA, embezzlement, I think when any of these things hit my homies, it's the emotional hurts them the most. I mean, some of the most confident dentists I've ever met in my life, you're like talking them off the Golden Gate Bridge from a Yelp review. I'm like, are you out of your mind? It's a Yelp review. Who cares? There's 8 billion people. At least 1 in 4 are batshit crazy insane at any level. In fact, the gorillas and the orangutans are probably saying, hey, don't call him a primate. That dude is sapien all the way. He is not orangutan. So they just emotionally can't withstand these shocks. Why do you think that is?
You know, they work so hard for their business. I think that's why I'm so passionate about helping doctors solve this small area for them, because you work so hard, and with the compliance laws the way that they are today, one incident can cripple a practice. It can put them under if they don't have the right safeguards in place. And so of course that's going to be emotional, right? And especially 90% of the incidents that we see happen because of human error. So that kind of is parallel to what you were describing about the embezzlement. You know, humans are perfect, things happen. And this is something where, it's not fun. You don't necessarily want to spend a lot of time on it, but you have to pay attention, because one incident could wreck you financially.
You know, I can't believe I'm going to turn 59, and I still, in my entire life, have still never made one mistake. In fact, I can't even say the word because I've never had to say it before. If you have, you're a young kid, you did your 5 years in a DSO, and that's what we see. I know people think DSOs are going to take over the world, and maybe they will, but I've already seen them all from the top down say, okay, we don't want the rural. Okay, so that's half of America. So these guys that are going to be the next Walgreens and CVS, they've already seceded half the country. And I only see them coming out of school and working for them for 5 years. So you got 6,000 graduates a year for 5 years. They only got a working pool of about 30,000 people. So she's done her 5 years at DSO, and she's going to open up her own dental office. But she assumes, since everybody has Dentrix the most, because that's owned by Shine, then Eaglesoft next, and then Open Dental, if I had those three, wouldn't that make me all compliant? I mean, obviously those guys would do everything right, right? So am I compliant because I use Open Dental?
Yeah. That's actually a question I get a lot, Howard. So what happens is when you're in the DSO environment, the purpose of the DSO is so that you can focus on patients. And you're not responsible for the back end things of running the business like compliance and whatnot. So when you go and open your own practice, you uncover all these things that you weren't aware of, and that being one of them. So here's the deal with EagleSoft, Curve, Dentrix, Dolphin, CareStream. All those softwares are compliant. They have to be because of the service that they're providing to a practice, but their compliance doesn't extend to you as the doctor or the practice owner. They're not addressing your staff training. They're not writing your HIPAA manual. They're not issuing business associate agreements for you to send to your other vendors. They're not going to respond and follow the breach notification laws for you when an incident happens. So they're a compliant solution and you're using a compliant software, but it's not actually making your practice compliant.
Interesting. And do you think the future going towards, there's going to be state-sponsored cyber terrorism, and it's going to be coming from Russia, North Korea, China, from an organized point of view, and then there'll be individuals. And again, I think a lot of really smart people think, like when you get that Nigerian email, and transfer funds, people think a third of those are coming from the United States. There's so many IT people. But do you think practice management software of the future needs to be on the cloud like Curve so that someone else does that? Or do you think that's the future?
I definitely think that that's the future. There's already, Dentrix and EagleSoft even have both desktop and cloud versions now. So Curve's like the one provider that is totally cloud-based, but even outside of dental, there's a lot of practice management softwares like in plastic surgery and derm, Nextech is cloud-based, for instance. So it's definitely the wave because the thing is technology makes things easier. What's happened is we're evolving at such a fast rate that we're not planning for the new risks that utilizing that technology comes with. We're being reactive versus proactive from a risk standpoint. So I definitely think that cloud-based is the wave of the future.
That is so interesting. These are very interesting times, and everything's moving so fast. You still always talk about encrypted email and text. How important is that? And do you do that?
Yeah, of course. I do that. It's important because look, it's not about you. It's about the information that you're sending, right? So I always look at it from the human element of I care about other people's information, and I know that doctors do too. And that's why you want to utilize encryption, because you're creating an added layer of security so that while the information is being transmitted, these cyber criminals that are circling, waiting for their next target, can't get access to that information. And so email encryption is definitely something you need to have if you're communicating with specialists. If I'm your patient and I ask you for my records, you need to be able to send that to me securely.
What's different about Dental Town than all the other websites is LinkedIn, Facebook, Twitter, they're all last in, first out. And what I did in the very beginning, I wanted it like the Jet Propulsion Laboratory. I wanted a message board system so that we could archive all that. So on Dental Town, it's, we have 275,000 members with 6 million archive posts organized. So each area sounds like, an FAQ. You can only ask a question so many times. So the 5 areas of regulation we have is documentation, HIPAA, infection control, injury prevention in the workplace, OSHA. So I just want to go through those first ones, like documentation. There's a lot of questions about e-prescriptions, things like that. We used to just write it on a prescription pad, give a piece of paper. I didn't Xerox it and make it a no. You might have made a deal, but what do you think of like e-prescriptions and documentation and dental records? What are your thoughts on documentation?
Yeah, so simple. Bottom line, documentation needs to be protected. So you need to have provisions in place to protect it in transmission and in storage. That's period, the bottom line. And then in addition to that security layer, Health and Human Services requires that you have written policies and procedures that show you understand the requirements of how to protect that information. So you've got two layers, the way that you're protecting the data in storage and transmission, and then the HIPAA manual. And you got to have both to be protected from the penalties.
And another thing that dentists always wonder, I grew up in Kansas, so whenever you read the news, you always thought, oh, that's coastal shit, right? California, New York, that shit don't apply in Kansas. Is this and for international listeners, it's so confusing because there's the United States of America, all this federal stuff, but then there's 50 states that really act like different countries. So when you're talking HIPAA, OSHA, infection control, injury in the workplace, is it more a national perspective or one, and the states are all pretty much the same? Or in your line of work, you've done thousands of offices. Does it matter which state you're in?
Yeah, it does. So you've got the federal regulations, which are going to be universal nationwide in the states. And then you've got the state regulations. And typically what happens is the state regulations are more stringent than the federal. So the state regulations are really where you've got to pay attention, because if you're following just the federal requirement, and let's say your state law has a faster timeline for you to report an incident, that's really common, and you go off of the federal one, now you're going to be issued a penalty because you didn't follow the time constraint issued by your state. So it definitely does matter where you live. And I've consulted thousands of practices in all of the states. So it's important that if you are outsourcing, you're working with someone who understands both layers.
On the two layers, which is the way you protect your data and...
So I'm referring to the two layers as the federal requirements and then the state legislation. So those would be the two layers of the requirements. And then for documentation, it's the technical safeguard, which is what you were referring to of how you protect the information. And then the administrative safeguard, that is how you document your awareness to the requirements.
Huh. But yeah, it's very confusing because like people even do it with insurance. Like they say, oh, well, Delta Dental. It's like, dude, first of all, that's a franchise. There's 38 different Delta Dentals. Yeah. Who are you talking about? And, my gosh, the HIPAA deals are just forever. Does anyone use Office 365 for HIPAA compliant email? How do you solve the email issue?
Yeah, so we have email encryption that comes with, so we basically have a total package that gets a practice compliant A to Z. Part of that includes encrypted email. The other ways that you solve for it is we see a lot of practices that have it with their IT provider, which is great. Office 365 is a solution for encrypted email. Some other big names are like DataMotion or SendInc or PBHS. Those are all HIPAA compliant versions of encrypted email.
Okay, so which sites do they go? I got three sites for you. I got the PCI, which is Payment Check, or what is it? Payment
Card Industry.
Payment Card Industry, HIPAA. And then I got the HIPAA Chick, and then I got Office Safe. Which one of the... Go ahead.
Yeah, so PCI HIPAA is the company. Office Safe is the software that we built to get practices compliant. And then HIPAA Chick is me as a consultant.
Okay, so I'm going to go to the HIPAA Chick because you're on the front. So I see 4 buttons. First step to HIPAA compliance. Number 2, the pitfalls to do-it-yourself HIPAA compliance. Number 3, don't trade your time for HIPAA compliance. And 4, the common misconceptions about HIPAA compliance. And the first step to HIPAA compliance, it says to realize that it's not about hippos. Did I get that right?
Yes.
It says, yes, I want to take the first step to HIPAA compliance. And so tell my homies why they should go to thehippaachick.com.
Well, because your listeners get a free risk assessment. So a risk assessment is going to be the starting point for compliance. It's what you use to, basically Health and Human Services requires it. So it's going to check a box of something you have to do anyway. And it's a really great way to get an understanding of your overall compliance health. so that you can know, if you have needs, where, and then some solution options to correct them. So the best way to start, if any of this confuses you or you're unsure, or you've been telling yourself, gosh, I need to address this part of my practice for some time, a risk assessment is the very best first step.
Okay. And then, is it true if they put in Dental Town, they get a discount?
This is true. Yeah,
Okay.
there's actually, I put something together for you, Howard. If you, you can also go to PCIHIPAA.com/Danielle, and the listeners can get access to a free CE training course. That's a 90-minute course that they'll automatically be issued a CE credit. And then that also shows the Dental Town discount or from your podcast for services if there's any interest.
Yep, I just did it, and it's true. All things true. Certified HIPAA. Oh, another thing you might want to do for marketing is we put 400 one-hour continuing education courses on Dental Town. They've been viewed over 1 million times.
Wow, that's incredible.
1 million. So you might. I'm Howard at dentaltown.com, but the other guy that does that, Howard Goldstein. So he's Hogo at Dental Town. But you ought to put one of these courses up there. So, okay. So I'm on the deal. Does your practice create and implement HIPAA policies and procedures for assessing and managing the risk to its electronic protected health information? I assume, since I don't know what you're talking about, the answer is no. Is that a fair assessment?
Yep. That's 98% of the time true.
Yeah, so she's got basically 18 questions. So you put in your name and email and all that. Then administrative safeguard questions, 19 questions. Then technical safeguards, 12. Physical, 4. Payment card industry compliance is 5. Asset protection. Now, if they've been divorced and no longer have assets, do they just skip that error? And by the way, speaking of divorce, when I saw your name first, the first person I thought of was... your name was Danielle McKinley. So I thought about Jeff Bezos' wife, Mackenzie Scott. And my mind couldn't wrap around it because your K is small. Danielle McKinley, but it's all small letters versus Matt Kenzie. I've never seen a small K. And I'm wondering, it's obviously Irish. Do you think your great-great-grandfather was so drunk from Jameson that he forgot to capitalize the K?
I think that's the story I'm telling. I think that's what happened because my whole life, this has been a question. So thank you, great grandfather, for indulging in the Jameson.
All right. So, so I agree with everything you're saying. Socrates said that humans have 2 emotions, greed and fear. And that's what humans come up with until they are look beyond the species. And then you go into biology. Everything is a predator or prey. You're eating an animal or a plant, and some other virus, fungi, animal, plant's about to eat you. And so they're the biggest motivators. When they see something, HIPAA, they just think, okay, is that prey where I can eat that as a resource, or is that a predator that can eat me? So they want to know, how bad can this get? I mean, how bad can HIPAA eat me with a fine, shut me down? How bad is HIPAA and OSHA as a predator?
It's pretty bad. I mean, it's bad if you don't have your ducks in a row, for sure. So some places where you can get real information about how bad it is, you can go to hhs.gov and Google HIPAA Wall of Shame. That is a portal that puts updates on different breaches, how they happened, the number of records that were affected. And if your practice has over a 500 record breach, you will end up on that portal. You can Google HIPAA penalties, HIPAA violations. They are civil and criminal. There are doctors that have gone to jail over a HIPAA incident. And it's just not something that you want to mess with. And if you can address it and be protected, you're going to be able to focus on your patients and enjoying your life, and rest assured that, hey, if something happens, you're proactive, you've got a plan, and the things you read about online are not going to happen to you.
So it's hss.gov, and it's compliance enforcement, right? Enforcement highlights.
Yeah, well, if you just go, you can just even Google HIPAA Wall of Shame.
Okay. HIPAA Wall of Shame?
HIPAA Wall of Shame, and it's HIPAA. Everybody likes 2 Ps.
Yeah.
And then your first search should be the hhs.gov portal. That should be the first thing that pops up. And if you click on it, it'll show you all the entity names, the state, the amount of records, and the type of incident, like how it happened.
Oh my gosh. I just did a search for dental. First one that came up was Dental Care Alliance out of Florida. Gosh, just a few months ago, December of 2020, hacking IT incident in the network server. Now, Dental Care Alliance, that's a big time operational DSO. That surprised me. Do you think it's because they're a bigger target than some hacker sitting around thinking, well, what's in Howard's one office? I'd rather go after a DSO. Or do you know, what do you think about the Dental Care Alliance incidents?
So from what I see, and I work with a lot of DSOs in addition to private, like single practices, is that a lot of the established DSOs are managing compliance internally. So they don't always have the full scope because it does change so frequently of the requirements that can be why they don't have all of the safeguards in place. And the hackers, as you go through that, keep in mind that this is just over the 500 records or more ones that are posted there. There's ones that happen every single day under that number that don't become public knowledge, but the hackers don't care. If you think of it like, ask yourself, how many records does my practice have? And on the black market, when they get the record, that's what they want. They want to sell the identity profile. That's the incentive. So the more records you have, I mean, most practices have between 1,000 to 6,000 in the single practice sector. If they're doing the 6-year retention, that's a big payday to them. So they don't really care what the size is. Obviously, the more they can get, the better, but they're not singling out large versus small, if that makes sense.
And are you primarily working with HIPAA, PCI, and OSHA? Those three? Is there another one that I missed?
No, so it's essentially it's PCI, HIPAA, and OSHA. Office Safe 360 is the solution. And simply put, what my firm does is we get a practice compliant, we keep them compliant. If something happens, we've got their back. And then the cyber and data breach insurance that's included prevents any financial losses.
Okay, so if they go to officesafe.com, so what you just said, what I just thought I heard was that of the three, I think I have too many notes. That's my problem. I need to have less notes for a show. So HIPAA, PCI, OSHA, those three things. Would you put them in order of who's the Wicked Witch of the West, the East, the Right? Which one is the if you had to put them 1 through 3, who's first place in beating up dentist, and then who would be second? Who should be worried about in a first, second, or third?
Yeah, so HIPAA and OSHA are kind of tied. OSHA has come, I would say, because of the pandemic and it being the largest occupational hazard, hopefully we will all ever see in our lifetime. We've seen a lot more whistleblowers and complaints on the OSHA side, but they really run neck and neck. And a HIPAA incident is by far going to cost you more. Either way, they both are expensive, but HIPAA is much more significant. And then PCI ties in because of a law that was passed that under the HIPAA sector, basically, if a healthcare practice has a credit card breach, it can also be a HIPAA violation. So getting compliant is really important with PCI because it addresses a double liability.
And do you, I don't want to get you in trouble with any of your colleagues, but do you think HIPAA and OSHA were done well by the government and that they're moderate and like say checks and balances? I mean, my homies don't like I'm supposed to, since I'm a dentist, I'm supposed to always get on here and beat up DSOs. And I'm like, no, what did I say? Transparency and checks and balances. Now in business, we call it competition, but checks and balances, I didn't want the absolute king or dictator or whatever. They broke our government up into the executive, judicial, legislative. Right. Now in business, it's called competition. And before DSOs, my God, if you fell off your bike on a Sunday and broke off your front tooth, you couldn't find a dentist open, and you'd find 3 mermaids and a unicorn before you found one dentist. And competition is good for an industry. When I got my MBA at Arizona State University, they beat me up showing about historically United States, how they protected an industry from competition around the world. And as soon as that expired within 10 years, usually the company would just go under. You need competition. If you're training to be the heavyweight champion of the world, you need to train every single day. And you don't need your trainer to say, oh, well, I just passed a law and you're protected from anybody fighting you for a whole year. How many boxing champions do you know took a year off and came back and they were still on the edge? I mean, it's a day-to-day thing. I like DSOs because they make us compete hard for the patient. We keep one eye on the patient, one eye on cost, and we do everything faster, easier, better, higher quality, lower cost, so that humans can have the ability to afford the freedom to save their teeth. So I like competition. But do you think, so the government, we need, if you, like take the libertarian point of view. The libertarian, just everything's about the individual, and they still don't get it. It's like, okay, so no government for anything. And they explain to you why you don't need government for anything. And I say, okay, so now all the individuals are absolute tyranny. I mean, they're you have to have checks and balance. And then if you say government, they go, oh, one world government and all this stuff like that. No, dude, it's competition. It's checks and balances to make you a better person so everybody wins. But in your expert opinion, do you think the government did a pretty good job in how they wrote up HIPAA and OSHA, or do you think it was, or not so?
Yeah, easy answer. No. And that's why we exist. That's why we're here. Is for the individual, because they didn't do a good job and there isn't a lot of reform happening with it. If anything, it's becoming more and more stringent, and they don't discriminate based on size. So a smaller practice doesn't have the same resources as a DSO or a hospital to navigate all of the requirements. And that's exactly why we got into the business. We advocate for the small practice to address something they have to do, but to make it easy so that they can focus on what really matters, which is the patient. So we're the good guys, if you will, is the way that I look at it. Is we're solving for something that you have to do by law, and we're trying to make it easy for the private sector.
So if they go to officesafe.com, officesafe.com, SAFE. What are they going to find at officesafe.com?
Yeah, that's just going to be more information about the solution. There's an option to take the risk assessment on there. I don't recommend going there for it just because you'll get invoiced. So if you use the PCIHIPAA.com/Danielle, that'll get you the free tools from listening today. But if
what about just a HIPAA Chick? That's easy to remember too. Is that
that's
be a good
fine
start too?
They're both set up for you. So either route, and then Office Safe is going to be more information about the actual solution, like the software that we created.
Okay, and I found the button on moving your YouTube video to YouTube. It's amazing how technologically challenged. So if you're back at the HIPAA Chick, first step to HIPAA compliance, we talked about all that. Now, the next button of 4, she has 4 buttons. The next one is the pitfalls to do-it-yourself HIPAA compliance, and talk about that.
Yeah, so I see a lot of, so I'll use the ADA solution as an example, because that's a common one that I see. It's a great solution for practices that have a lot of time to dedicate to documentation. The pitfalls that I see is you never end up having enough time to actually execute the way you need to prevent the penalties. And you end up spinning your wheels and spending dollars on employees where you're trying to delegate it to them. That's the number one pitfall that we see. And ultimately, trying to delegate to your office manager and say, hey, customize this ADA manual, for example.
Are you saying ADA as in the American Dental Association?
Yeah.
Okay, so you're saying a big common problem is using the ADA HIPAA.
No, no, no.
Okay, I missed
That's something that you can absolutely do. So that's a good solution for a practice that has like 80 plus hours to dedicate to customizing a manual. The pitfall is that most practices don't have that kind of time. And if it doesn't actually get done, is the same as having no manual at all. So it's really the pitfalls come into trying to do it on your own, not ever having enough time to actually accomplish all of the requirements to do so.
Okay, so then we're back to button number 3. Don't trade your time for HIPAA compliance.
Yeah. So, all in all, there's a lot of moving parts to compliance, and we've talked about this a lot today. Ultimately, doctors don't want to spend their time on compliance, and they want their office team to be helping them run the business. So when you outsource, you save a lot of time and money, and you get true compliance.
So now we're on number 4 button, the common misconceptions about HIPAA compliance.
Yeah. So we talked about one really common one today, which is where you think your practice management software is enough to keep you compliant. And we talked about why that isn't the case. Another very common misconception that I see is that having a specific like dental IT company that's managing your technical safeguards, they assume that they're responsible for everything and that they're compliant, and they're only responsible for the technical component, like your firewall, your antivirus, your overall network security. And there's a whole other side, which is training, documentation, and what's referred to as the administrative side. So practices run into this situation where they're like, well, I have a HIPAA compliant IT company. Isn't that enough? And that, it is for the technical safeguards, but you got to think about everything else. Those are the 2 most common misconceptions that I see. Another one that I'll share, because I've been seeing it a lot recently, is around business associate agreements. So business associate agreements are designed to protect a practice from a third-party vendor that causes a data breach or an exposure. And practices, if you're receiving an agreement from your vendor, that is just them telling you that, hey, they're aware they have to protect the information, but it doesn't fulfill your requirement under the HIPAA laws. You have to have your own agreement and proof that you're sending.
Yeah. So if you go to YouTube and type in HIPAA Chick, it goes right to her channel. And what I would do, I would change your YouTube channel. Like my YouTube channel is youtube.com/Dentaltown Magazine. And I still want to just like hurt the person that added the word magazine, because now, there's 14,000 subscribers on my YouTube channel and they got to type in that magazine. But you could, I'd recommend changing your YouTube to just youtube.com/HIPAA Chick. But I love your videos.
I'll take your advice. You've got way more listeners than I do. So noted.
You know who has more listeners than me? My oldest sister's a nun, and she teaches nuns. She has almost twice as many YouTube subscribers as me, and she reminds me of it every time we talk. But anyway, and like I say, this isn't a commercial. She didn't give me a dime. I called her. She didn't call me. But I'm really impressed with her, man. She's endorsed by the New Mexico Dental Association, Kentucky Dental Association, Alabama, Blatchford Solutions, 6 Month Smiles. I mean, the American Association of Oral Maxillofacial Surgeons. I mean, you're really doing very well in this. And then I also like that this logo you have. PCIHIPAA's compliance program ensures your practice has comprehensive protection, but it talks about HIPAA compliance, payments. That's what I want to go to next. Credit card processing, PCI compliance, ransomware, and data breach. I want to tell you that, I always tell you about my mistakes. I mean, I've told you, my student loans was $87,000. My divorce was $3.8 million. My divorce cost me 41 times more than dental school. So if you're still whining about your student loans, it just means you're a baby that's still in dental kindergarten school. Back to embezzlement, I was embezzled from. But see, when I was little, it was all paper. And one of my checks never came back. And finally, I called Darlene Wing over at the bank, and I said, this check isn't coming back in yet. And she looked it up. She goes, no, it's cash. She told me the amount. I said, I don't remember. She goes, well, when you cash a check at Chase, we always take a photo at the desk, And I got the photo of it right now, and I'll just run it over to you because she's in the parking lot. And always do business local. I don't care how much money you or your spouse spend, but make sure it's in driving range of your patient pool. And then it's just marketing and whatever. She came over as my damn dental assistant, cashed a check for, I think it was $3,000. So I just walk over to her and I go, what the hell's this? And she just burst out bawling and ran out the door, and that whatever. So it can happen anyway. But where I am afraid of the next generation is back then you need to come into my office and steal a check. Now it's all digital. So they come in, they pay for a root canal, then your receptionist takes the money, but credits it to another account or this or that. It seems like every year that goes by, I'm hearing of a way to steal money that didn't exist in the 80s. Do you agree or disagree with that?
Yeah, definitely. And it comes back to what I said earlier, where technology helps us because it streamlines so much, but it creates these risks that we don't think about. And the payment card industry is an example of that because there's so many different machines and terminals that you can use where you can do what you said. You refund a card or cancel a transaction and then refund it to a different card and things like that. So yeah, I definitely see that.
So on that identity theft restoration, if you're just got out of dental school, got $400,000 student loans, could someone steal your identity and then they have to pay off your student loans and then you just go re-register under a new human name?
I think we would be marketing identity theft if that was the case, right? We would change our business model. No, I mean, the identity theft protection is like everyone should have that. And if, a tip for all of the listeners would be any of the three credit bureaus, you can go on their site and sign up for free credit monitoring. You don't have to pay for that, where they send you alerts if someone's trying to use your profile. What you want to invest in is you want protection for restoration, like after your identity has been compromised, someone to help you with the recovery process.
And remember, if your student loans, if you decided that they're just too much, you can't pay them back, you got to remember that there's not that many countries that do not have an extradition treaty with the United States. You're pretty much limited to Russia, China, Mongolia, Brunei, the Gulf states, Montenegro, Ukraine, Moldova, Vietnam, Cambodia, Laos, and the Maldives, Vanuatu, and Indonesia, Ethiopia, Botswana, and Tunisia. So what I want you to do, if you're thinking, I'm just going to leave my $400,000 student loans here, and I'm going to leave to a country that can't extradite us back, only on Dentistry Uncensored did you get the complete list of all the countries that you can escape to. So, my gosh, I could talk to you for 40 days and 40 nights. I can't believe we already went over an hour, but what else, what did we not talk about that you wish we did?
We covered a lot. I think that the takeaway would be, this doesn't have to be complicated. This doesn't have to be a pain or a nuisance for you. It's something that, you can outsource and get it addressed. And if you haven't taken a risk assessment, take one. It'll help you understand where you're at and if you need help. And it's something you don't want to ignore because it's like insurance. If you don't have it, it's really painful. And it's something that if you do, you're in a good spot. So take a risk assessment and just make sure that you're protected and you have an awareness.
And just tell them they love stories. I mean, that's how most knowledge was passed down from generation to generation, just in storytelling. And it's these great stories. But leave them on a story about a dentist who should have taken this more serious. Do you have any of those stories?
I have a great story. So early on in my consulting career, I would actually lecture at the Las Vegas Institute of Cosmetic Dentistry, LVI Global. It's a continuing education school in Las Vegas.
I'm a graduate from Bill Dickerson.
Yeah, Bill Dickerson.
Thank you, Bill, for all the training you gave me.
Yeah, we still work with them, and they're really awesome. But anyway, I was lecturing, and there was this doctor that was really busting my chops, like hammering me with questions, and was a true non-believer, and just gave me a rough time during the lecture. And I loved it because he was asking good questions, but ultimately he didn't end up working with us and had a data breach. And he came back and said, gosh, number one, I'm sorry. Number two, how can you help me? And number three, I'm going to refer all of my friends to you because I now understand everything you were telling me in the lecture. And still friends with that doctor today, and great experience because he was the biggest non-believer in something happening that I've ever seen in the over 10 years I've been doing this.
That's great. And what I loved about this, look at her attitude. She had a heckler. She didn't cry. She didn't get violent. She didn't get mad. She just goes with it. I mean, come on, docs. You are some thin-skinned people. A Yelp review, and you lose your mind. Be a little thicker, because I'll tell you what, if you're in dental kindergarten school, I guarantee you this is the reality that everyone's agreed on, that those dentists sitting in the front two rows that get straight A's and 4.0s and trying to get into specialty school, then the middle row, the B's and all that kind of stuff. But most people will tell you that the people that had the biggest practices and made the most bank were all in the last couple of rows, and they were the C guys. They took everything with a grain of salt, but what they knew is they were well-rounded, and they knew how to talk to people, and they knew how to look them in the eyes. And like Walmart gives 1% of all their sales, it goes to refunds. When someone wants their money back for a denture, I don't even blink. It's like, okay, that's a no-brainer. I mean, hell, you live a mile up the street from me. Like, I'm gonna really piss off some 70-year-old man who lives a mile from my office for the next 30 years. Just be a people person. Look them in the eyes, and you're gonna make far more money being relaxed, having a good time, treating your people well, and this whole damn podcast could have just been 1 minute, and it's called outsource. If you don't know what the hell's going on, because here's what I know about my homies. If they don't know their numbers, well, hell, they got A's in geometry. They know the difference between a cosine, a sine, a tangent. They know the difference between derivatives and all that stuff. I mean, you couldn't be a dentist if you weren't smart enough to know all this stuff. So whenever you find a dentist and they don't understand something, the same guy who got A's in calculus, physics, biology, and chemistry, it only means one thing: you don't like it. And if you don't like it, when you do things for money you don't like, it never turns out good. It leads to depression, disease, addiction. So if you don't like this shit, outsource it. I can guarantee you, what percent of your life do you spend obsessed with HIPAA, Danielle?
Mine, a great deal more than any of the listeners. Right. But the thing is it's not about HIPAA or the laws. What makes me love what I do is helping. Like, fundamentally, I love service and giving back. And I just think it's so unfortunate that a doctor can work so hard and one incident could take all that hard work away. And so that's what really motivates me to spend my time learning and growing and figuring out how to solve for that niche requirement for practices.
Very good. On that note, thank you, HIPAA Chick, for coming on the show. And it was an honor to podcast you. And I hope everybody learns your lessons the best way instead of the hard way.
Thank you so much. It was a pleasure. I appreciate your time.
All right. Have a great day.
You too.